Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to the finale of my Stormblood retrospective. It's hopefully been an eventful or quiet December, depending on which you would prefer, for everyone watching. Before we get started, I just want to say it has been a wonderful 2023. It's had its ups and downs, as years always do, but I'm glad to have another year of making this content for you, and a year of looking back on all of the things that have defined the last 10 years of Final Fantasy XIV for this channel. Obviously, there's still more to look back on, but I wanted to start off by saying thank you for 2023 and Happy New Year. With that, let's start talking about the finale of Stormblood. Now, being the final major patch before we would get the expansion of Shadowbringers, a lot of us would come to expect that they would slow down on whatever it is they were trying to do. Fact of the matter is, while patch 4.5 would release to a very standard patch release, it would also go on to try some things. Some worked, some didn't, and some are definitely still points of discussion to this day. So without further ado, let's check it out. Now, before we get going with this video, we do have a sponsor, and it is none other than Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. This free-to-play game lets you replay entries from the Final Fantasy VII series with a mix of updated retro graphics and modern remake-style graphics. You can utilize its familiar ATB combat system, play through parts of Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, and even the original First Soldier story, where you get to meet Sephiroth in his youth and dive a little bit more into his history, as well as some brand new characters. Now, of course, I know you're thinking about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth right now, and so is Ever Crisis. The game is currently celebrating the approaching launch of Rebirth with a big event. Tons of free draws, a collaboration event featuring Cloud and Sephiroth's trip through Nibelheim, and new weapons and outfits, including Tifa's Guide outfit and Red's Hellhound outfit. Between login bonuses and the event itself, you'll have tons of useful stuff for starting out or for coming back. So if you want to try out Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis and support the channel, simply click the link in the description or use the QR code on the screen and give the game a shot. It's available on iOS, Android, and even Steam, in case you missed that announcement, with the ability to link your data and continue where you left off from one platform going to another. So be sure to use the QR code or link and give it a shot. And don't forget, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is soon. It launches February 29th on the PlayStation 5. There's a demo and a twin pack that includes Final Fantasy VII Remake in case you need a refresher before that comes out, or in case you've never played it. I'll include links for Rebirth pre-orders in the description of the video as well. And with that, let's talk about patch 4.5. Of course, main scenario quests. How many videos has it even been at this point that I even have to say this? Really captivating and exciting main scenario quests, though, that got me really pumped for Shadowbringers that would be like 6 months down the line. Because it's a 0.5 patch, the MSQ was split into two halves, and that worked very well here. Probably one of the more impressive 0.5 patches, probably for me, while not volume-wise on par with 2.5 and 2.55, definitely up there in terms of expansion excitement. It also came with the dungeon, the Gimlet Darkened. This was, again, a cool dungeon. I don't really ever have too much to say. It's nice to have all of the NPCs that we've kind of met at this point, that we maybe experienced quests with and all that, fighting all around us and interacting with us. Those kind of dungeons are always really fun. But at the end of the day, a dungeon is a dungeon. I'm not going to go too crazy over it, but I like this one. Now, funnily enough, the finale of the Four Lords is here, and this one was a little contentious on release. First, the actual trial in that of Seiryu was one that I think really highlights more traditional play. They got rid of the kind of long, drawn-out phase that's ultra gimmicky and went back to a more traditional extreme trial ad phase leading up to the super attack. But they do some really neat details here, such as dropping you off in what would be considered the death wall and making you swim to safety while dodging AoEs. It's a really small bit that should be somewhat reminiscent of things like the dance phase and the air phase in Byakuya, but it lasts no more than a handful of seconds, so it never really overstays its welcome and is a nice little added interaction that teaches you how that death wall is going to work throughout the rest of the fight. And that it's not really a death wall, it's just not safe to be there at any given point, and it'll stun you briefly if you end up in it. But this fight was so-so on a lot of people's lists, mostly because the hype and excitement of the songs from Suzaku, from Tsukuyomi, from Byakuya, Shinryu. Seiryu has a really catchy tune, but it's not one of those like hard bangers or like songs you can sing along. It doesn't have any lyrics, and songs that don't have lyrics are always hit or miss with a lot of people in Final Fantasy XIV. This is one of my favorite songs to just pop up because I kind of forget how like good it sounds until I'm actually hearing it again. So I think it was an excellent way to cap things off, but I can tell you that definitely on content, it didn't really get that major amount of respect. Even though it had a pretty interesting tank swap style mechanic, a really, really well done ad phase, and I think a very executionally heavy, but very fun and frantic final phase. So, Seiryu, double thumbs up. However, that wasn't really the thing that was contentious about it. The actual story in that of the Four Lords had been teasing an encounter with the god Koryu, and we never get to fight it. It's pretty much resolved in a cutscene, and everyone's been like, no, I wanted to fight that thing. We even do see Koryu in the cutscene, but we never get to fight it. I'm still hoping for a Four Lords Ultimate with a Koryu phase. Please, Yoshi P and team. Now, speaking of fun and frantic, we have the finale to the Ivalice raid series as well with the Orbone Monastery. You know, there's been a lot of notorious 24-mans at this point. The Weeping City of Mach, you had Dunskaith, which had tons of bosses that caused problems, and even the previous 2 Ivalice raids. However, Orbone Monastery is one that lives on in infamy. Even though it has been severely nerfed since its initial release, it was an absolute menace to get through with some of Final Fantasy Tactics' most iconic characters and iconic encounters. Nothing will ever beat, in a lot of people's eyes, the third encounter in that of Thunder God Cid. He had his name very well earned as an OP status in Final Fantasy Tactics, and he has definitely re-earned it here as probably the single most popular 24-man boss, even after his nerfs. Not to mention, the final boss was nothing to scoff at either. Everything in this raid is cinematic and fun and dangerous, even again, post-nerf. Just not as dangerous as it used to be. I think this will go down, in my opinion, as the best 24-man that Final Fantasy XIV has ever had. And given our track record in Endwalker, I don't see that being beaten anytime soon. Now, they did do some last little job adjustments here before the next expansion. There were some monk buffs and some actually sizable machinist buffs. But probably the most interesting thing were enmity reductions on White Mage. They basically dropped the enmity of all of their skills, something they really could have used way earlier, all the way back in 4.2, the very first mechanic in Kefka. I remember being afraid that White Mages were going to pull aggro in that fight a lot. But it's very interesting because it's indicative of a change that was going to be present in Shadowbringers, where they were basically going to do away with enmity control even being a game mechanic. Tank stance was going to be permanent in Shadowbringers, and that was made entirely evident that they wanted to get us closer to that point for the remainder of Stormblood with these changes to White Mage. So they seem strange in kind of isolation, the amount that White Mage was reduced, but it really does feel like to get people's mentalities in line for what would eventually be in the following expansion. And in terms of just kind of random quality of life, like I brought up in previous videos, there's not really a whole lot of that I feel like I need to highlight. I mean, there were some PvP balance changes to make melees and tanks, take less damage and do more damage because they were on the front lines, and changes to the rules on Astrologos to make it so you had to destroy a tower before you could realistically go for the base. There was also some buffs to Eureka and things that were, again, sorely needed still. Pagos was still treacherous to go around and actually get to locations if you were too low of a level, so they made it so you could access the teleports at a much earlier level, assuming you were willing to walk past some of the really dangerous mobs. They also made it so that in both Pagos and Pyros, the rate of crystal acquisition for your relic would be greatly enhanced. In fact, Pyros also even got buffs to the individual actions, which would be important given the finale of Eureka would be coming in the .x5 patch. But then you have a ton of heavy hitters here that all have backstories and discussions going around. I mean, even just the little things like the Air Force One gate being added in. I mean, there's been people asking for Savage versions of that, and all it is a fun little mini game where you shoot in an airplane to get some MGP. It's not supposed to be a hardcore activity. That was in 4.5. Doman Mahjong was added in 4.5, and this, I think, has a fascinating story. If you didn't know, there is Mahjong in Final Fantasy XIV, and it was literally made by one of the employees in their spare time because they loved Mahjong and they wanted to put it in Final Fantasy XIV. As they were progressing with the project, they showed it to Yoshi P, and bam, Final Fantasy XIV would have Mahjong. It would go on to be one of the most popular free-to-play access Mahjongs in Japan when they would later enhance the free trial. So the fact that 14 inadvertently became a mahjong, an online mahjong like leaderboard. It's kind of a crazy thing to think about. Not to mention, it exposed mahjong to a lot of people who weren't aware of it in the West, and there are plenty of people who go out of their way to indulge in this game and actually learn it and enjoy it. So who would have thought that one person's passion could so directly impact Final Fantasy XIV? There was also the custom delivery NPC that I have never done, the Agkarok. I don't even know if that's how you say his name, but it's the dude in the pig suit in Idleshire, I believe. Yeah, that was always a weird one to me. I never did it. I've heard the story for, well, all the custom delivery stories are actually pretty good. At least all the ones I've done. But yeah, that was added in this patch. There was also some preparation for the World Visit feature, which would come later in the 4.5x series, which we all kind of overly indulge in now. You know, I think a lot of people maybe World Visit to do certain things a little too much. Ether a little too popular in raiding. Data center travel would eventually become really the thing that would cause that issue. But World Visiting was really nice, being able to hop around to the different market boards, to be able to participate in other servers' hunts, and just another way to do things like treasure maps and whatnot in other people's field areas when you weren't on the same server. It opened up a lot of content and hangout types, and I'm really grateful for it. However, one addition was, and still is, quite a contentious one, in that of Blue Mage. This was Final Fantasy XIV's first limited job, and I cannot describe to you the level of confusion that came with this announcement. It actually happened at the North American Fan Festival many, many months prior to its actual implementation here, and when they described it to us at first, we were really excited, and we heard what limited job, and we're like, what the heck is that? And then they described it, and I can tell you, the crowd was on the quieter side as they described that one. Essentially, it can't do any of the major content. It can't just queue into the duty finder, but it can solo out in the world and level up by just killing mobs and learn enemy skills. It has its own unique content, and that of the Masked Carnival, which asks you to use the spells you've picked up and learned to figure out sort of puzzle-style encounters where you're either going up against a very particular opponent with a very particular weakness, or trying to navigate some really strange field where you have to force enemies to interact with the environment in certain ways. It was actually really fun for its initial release, and not to mention you could take 8 of them into raids and extreme trials and get all sorts of achievements and titles and whatnot. But it was really advertised as this like open world solo friendly job that didn't really end up being that, because you really had to group up to do a lot of the spell learning. You really had to group up to do anything efficiently. It was really just the Masked Carnival that was solo at all. And that left people really confused, because the whole reason it was introduced was because they said they couldn't do a traditional Blue Mage in Final Fantasy XIV where you go around and just learn enemy skills. They needed that kind of rigid complex to it that they had with all the other jobs if they wanted to do it like all the other jobs. So they opted to go with this new type of function instead of trying to figure out a way to just make it work in the rest of the game. Don't get me wrong. I've loved my time with Blue Mage. I have had a lot of fun with it, but that time is very finite because I don't find myself really wanting or needing to do this content all that much. Not to mention they've been really bad about in recent patches the reward structure for it. We know there's a new limited job coming in Dawn Trail, and I am curious. That is, I guess, the end emotion that I have from that. But that initial release was, the people who liked it loved it, even if they didn't play it much past when they finished everything, and the people who were disappointed are still disappointed to this day and will probably remain disappointed for pretty much ever. Now, while there's tons of little quality of life, I want to jump to patch 4.55 because that had a handful of things that, again, made a huge impact on Final Fantasy XIV and the way we perceive the types of content they release. First of all, they added a new Astrologos map, a new Rival Wings map, I guess I should say at this point, and that of the Hidden Gorge. It basically took a bunch of feedback they had received from Astrologos and addressed it directly while adding in a few new things of its own. It's a pretty fun and cool map, and again, really depressing that it doesn't seem like Square supports Rival Wings in the same way they support Frontlines. What did it do to hurt you, Square? What did it do? But most importantly was the finale of Eureka in that of Hydatos. This was very similar to Pyros, but with a little blander of a zone. It's just kind of a flat open field with some reverse water effects and weather like the other ones. But the structure was nearly identical for the most part. One major change to Hydatos was after you finished the story, you could defeat a boss that would spawn on the southern end called Avni, and then this would shortly after spawn 48 portals around the map. And players could either use a key item to get into locked portals or wait till the portals themselves became unlocked in order to enter our first high-end massive raid, in that of the Baldesion Arsenal. It's a 48 to 56 player maximum raid where if you die, you're staying dead. Logos actions can be used to raise, but nothing in the traditional sense can be, which means you have to bring either lots of re-raises in the form of your remembrances, or your healers have to sacrifice their lives and then hope that they get their re-raise procs. On top of all the actions you could bring in or counteract the various dangerous environments, trash mobs, and bosses, it was something that was like nothing we had before in Final Fantasy XIV. As someone who is personally a part of the world first effort here on North America and was successful at getting world first in Baldesion Arsenal, it holds a special place in my heart, and its accessibility is far greater than one would assume based on how it's been described to you right now and how it's often described by other people. While it is a permadeath raid, as long as you don't kill everyone else and as long as you just kind of follow the very efficient leaders who have for years now gone out of their way to make this a consistent experience, you can easily get in and get a clear and get your own mount to get your own stuff. It's just such a unique experience that to this day, people still do. You can find Baldesion Arsenal runs multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a night on pretty much every data center in Final Fantasy XIV. There's so little content that is so evergreen to the Final Fantasy XIV community that when we get something like this, and we don't even know it, we didn't know it was going to be that. We were worried about people organizing it back then. We were worried about portal sniping and the fact they even had the key item in the first place and the difficulty of it. But as time went on, as jobs changed, as quality of life came in, and as people really jumped to the forefront of the community, of these Eureka communities, to make Baldesion Arsenal runs a thing for any player, not just the hardcore, that was really what accelerated it into this very unique spot. And to this day, every week I have people say, I just did BA for the first time. I got my Demi-Osma. I got this mount. I got my Vermilion cloak. I upgraded my weapon to Physios. I did all this. It's just great. And I can't recommend it enough, especially for what the Eureka community has gone out of their way to do and the hard work that they've put in. It far eclipses any world first achievement I could have had in this because they made it something for everyone. And that was how we capped off patch 4.5. Of course, World Visit still hadn't hit at this point. It came a little bit closer to the release of Shadowbringers, but we all know how that turned out, so I don't think I need to talk about it too much. Anyway, that's a wrap for our Stormblood retrospective, so hopefully you enjoyed hearing about what is my favorite expansion from a content perspective. Be sure to like and subscribe and let me know what you think in the comment section of the video below about the Baldesion Arsenal, Hydatos, Eureka, Blue Mage. Put whatever you want down there. I just want you to engage with the video. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. And until then, take care.